Welcome to What's Your Story podcast. I'm your host, Matt Story. On this pod, I sit down with people of color leaders to understand how they've been able to use their superpowers to make an impact on our world. And I do it one story at a time. My guest on the podcast this week is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging expert with deep experience helping organizations meet their business objectives through providing a safe and welcoming environment for their employees. And I'm particularly looking forward to hearing more about his story. So please welcome Victor Simmons to the show.
Wow, thanks. Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here. I'm so excited to do this.
Awesome. Well, I've been looking forward to this. I'm just happy to have you on the mic today with me. But before we get into hearing more about your story, I wonder if you could take us back and maybe share a little bit about your background and maybe give us a glimpse into what little Victor may have been like.
You know, my dad was in the Air Force, and so I grew up initially on an Air Force base in Maryland at Andrews Air Force Base. And then it was only a couple of installations. We were at Andrews, then we went out to Rhein-Main, Germany. So we were there for a couple of years, and then back to Andrews. And part of the military culture for kids growing up at that time is, you know, if you weren't in school, then you had to be in activities. And so growing up, I was in, football and baseball. And if I wasn't doing either of those for school, then I was in another, like a community, had to be in some sort of a community activity. I was in Cub Scouts, and then I think it was Webelos next before you get to Boy Scouts. And so I was always on the move, always doing, had to do something. You know, if you weren't doing school, you weren't doing your homework, then you had to be out doing a organized activity of some sort.
I'm curious, did you have an idea of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, growing up, seeing these jets, I was fascinated by that. So growing, at an early age, the first thing for me was, hey, I wanted to do that. I wanted to fly one of these jets, and the natural progression. A lot of the astronauts came out of Air Force flying. So that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an astronaut.
I'm a firm believer that the experiences you have when you're growing up, they give you skill sets that we pull from as we get older and we go through our journeys. And I think when we connected prior to getting on the podcast, you shared kind of what your dad did and how unique his career was. And I'm just curious if you could share how his job actually influenced you and your outlook on what you could do as you were going through your own journey.
Yeah, it was a tremendous impact on me. My dad, he was a steward on Air Force One, starting with, when we were in Rhein-Main, Germany, he had a couple of missions for Kennedy. One of the Air Force One crew members was sick, but my dad had enough flying hours at that time that he would qualify to be able to fly on Air Force One, and as such, he got the gig. So he did a couple of missions when Kennedy came to Europe, and he hit it off with the colonel, the pilot, who was a colonel, and they ended up working out a transfer for him to Air Force One. And he came back, did a couple of the final flights with Kennedy, and then he was officially assigned during the Johnson administration up through Ford. And so during that time, growing up, there wasn't any of that kind of security that we have now. So I grew up going down with my dad to the hangar and being able to go on to the planes, go and be in the hangar where you see all the catering action going on. And, even though he had this illustrious opportunity, this illustrious career, we were like everybody else, a middle-class family. And to make ends meet, he had a second job within the Air Force where he was a bartender at the NCO Club, Non-Commissioned Officers Club. And so I would go down with him from time to time. So I grew up where the hustle and bustle, the catering is going on for the plane. And then being a kid at the NCO Club, I'm in the back office and seeing all the hustle bustle behind the scenes of the club and getting fed hamburgers and stuff. And so that was pretty cool growing up. And so I was around that environment at an early age, and that made an impression on me. And so naturally, as a teenager, I had a bunch of different jobs, but by the time I got to high school and really looking to make some money, I gravitated into restaurants. That's what I started doing initially, was restaurants. And then the year I graduated from high school was a great opportunity. We used to go to Vail, Colorado every year because that's where the Fords vacation during the summer. The year I graduated, my family went to the Bahamas this time for vacation, but I still wanted to go to Vail. And my dad said, sure, you can do that if you want, as long as you pay your own way. And he got me a hotel or a condo through one of Ford's friends. And he got me a job at this Marriott hotel in Vail through a friend of the Fords that owned this hotel. And I got a gardening job at this hotel. And I did that for the summer. And when I came back, I transferred to a hotel in the desert where we were living at that time. And the rest is history. I took off from there. I just stayed in hotels and moved my way up.
I'm curious that you had the opportunity to live outside of the U.S. at a very early age. And it sounds like that, not only the job, but just also the environment you're in, exposed you to a lot of things growing up. So I'm curious, what did you learn about the world, or what did you learn about yourself having that experience that wasn't limited to just one place in one city, as a lot of us have growing up?
Well, and to be frank, I don't know that I learned anything about myself initially because, when we were in Rhine-Main, I was very, very young. But what did impress upon me at an early age was that there are different cultures, there are different ways of life, there are different ways of doing things. And just because that's different doesn't mean that it is bad. And so being on an Air Force installation, it's relatively diverse. It's relatively diverse. So I was exposed to that early on, as opposed to living in one particular community. I was in a pretty diverse community to begin with, and then being abroad, a whole way of life that's entirely different. And we had a great experience being there. And so coming back to the States, and then just seeing folks that maybe only think of one direction, only sort of in their silo about certain things, I could see that was problematic because I had a different experience. So I've always, it was kind of hard to put to name what that is, but I could clearly see that there are differences, and there's nothing wrong with that. That people had great way of life in Germany where we were, different languages for that matter.
You kind of led us into kind of your entry into the work world, but you were actually able to rise to the ranks of hospitality and get into executive leadership positions. I'm curious, going into it, did you think that you were going to build a long-lasting career in hospitality? Was that the goal, or was that the thought process?
Yeah, I did. Another thing about me, while I was in college, I was already having kids. So I had kids, pretty young. I had two. By the time the year I graduated from college, I had my second child. And going into it, at this moment when I had my first kid, I had to call my dad, who told me not to go down there with that girl. Don't go down there with that girl. You're 19 years old. You got plenty of time for girls later. What did I do? I moved to San Diego with this girl, and to go to San Diego State University. And one thing led to another. Guess what? She was pregnant, and I called my dad to get chewed out and deal with that. And I told him that my plan was to go into the Air Force Academy. I'm going to go into the academy because now I got a kid. And he said, no, what you need to do is graduate from college. You're not going to join the Air Force. After you graduate, you can consider that, but do not get out of school. Get your education first, because if you're going to go in the military, then you, with a college degree, you can go in OCS, Officer Candidate School, and you can be an officer, not enlisted. And so I thought about, okay, if I'm not doing that, what am I going to do? And I thought about all the jobs I had done, because at that point I was a security guard in San Diego, trying to make my way through college, thanks to Visa and MasterCard, because it did not come, again, middle-class family, couldn't afford college. I paid for college. Well, Visa and MasterCard paid for my college, along with the student loan. And so, but I thought about what are the things that I'd done and that I enjoyed the most, and it was restaurants and hotels, and that's what I enjoyed most. And so I moved back from San Diego when that semester was over, back to the desert where we were at that time, my family was, and commuted to Cal Poly Pomona, an hour and a half away, to go to hospitality management school. So I wanted to get that degree in hotels and restaurants because that's what I'm going to make my career. So I knew at that point in my life, critical point in my life, that I'm going to make hotels my career and let me get my education in that. And that's what I ended up doing.
But while you were doing that, you decided to make a functional shift into HR. And I'm curious, because a lot of people, as we're going through our journeys, we think of it as up and to the right, just continue to get more promotions, get more people, more budget, et cetera. But I'm curious for you, how did you know that was going to be a good move for your journey? And did you have any concerns or worries going into that transition?
Yeah, because, I didn't know. What occurred was my oldest at that point was hitting his teen years, and a fun night for him was hanging out with his grandmother. And I was a convention services manager, so I'm working 7 a.m. to sometimes 10 o'clock at night, handling groups, handling the conventions that come into our hotel. And I wanted him to get into a little bit of trouble. I did growing up, get into a little bit of trouble. And in order to do that, I wanted to be around. And I thought at the time, I had been in operations all my life and now in convention services, having a great career at this point. But I thought HR was an 8 to 5 weekends off job. I thought it was. And it can be, but not in Palm Springs, California, where I was at this time, in resorts. Resorts you have whole entire teams that work on the weekends. I didn't know this, or I didn't realize this at this point. And then there's, there's a PM shift. And as an HR practitioner, I wanted to, when I got into it, I ended up working my way into HR. I decided I'll do this. And once I got in, I realized it's not. If you want to be successful, you got to be there. I didn't work every weekend, but I worked a lot of weekends because I wanted to be out there folding towels with the pool and get to know those folks and get to know, folks that are at the spa and all the other areas of the hotel, and work sometimes I would work late at night so that I could see the PM and build relationships with them. And so it turned out that once I got in, one of my concerns was, and I was practicing in California, which is one of the most robust in terms of employment law states. And I was concerned, will I be able to do that? I figured I'll pick it up, I could learn, and that's what I ended up doing. But that was a concern I had. But I was with Marriott also, which is they have a good foundational training format that they put you through. You have to test at the end of this training program. You have to test out, just like you do in our SHRM, our HR association. If you want to be certified, you have to take this test, this exam, and you had to do that just going into HR for Marriott. So I was able to get in, overcome the training, be able to understand California law, which is an ongoing thing. And it turned out to be the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I loved what I was doing in convention services, but it turned out to be the most rewarding thing, helping folks get promoted, providing for their family, watching out for folks that had conflict and being able to help people through that. Hospitality is a people business, and I just love that.
So then came your focus on DEI and B. This happened prior to, I think, a lot of organizations kind of getting on board or getting in line. I was really focusing in that area. I'm curious, why was it important for you to be a leader in the DEI and B space particularly? I'll
tell you, being someone who's Black, when I started out in HR, and working for Marriott is very associate centric to begin with. And Marriott, this is in the 90s, and Marriott was already doing work in this space before they had these terms that we're using today. They were doing work around pay equity. They were doing programming for underrepresented groups. They were looking at succession planning with a DEI lens. And so when I got in, again, that was something that I learned. And so I was already a champion of underrepresented folks. I was already an advocate for people. as an HR practitioner, and I was doing those things, what I learned from Marriott, and when I went on to Starwood in my hotel, even though at that point the company wasn't necessarily focused on that as aggressively as Marriott was, but as an HR practitioner for my hotel, and then ultimately hotels, when I moved to Starwood, I had 3. I was doing those things. And then when I got to Wyndham, I really had perfected those things and doing those things, so much so that, and now at this point, I was an area director. I had 8 hotels at this point, and I was doing those things not only for my base hotel, but all 8 of my hotels where I had my HRDs doing the same thing. And I eventually moved from California to New Jersey, right next to the corporate offices. But before I had moved, I was inviting senior leaders to come see and participate in some of the things that I was doing, some of the programming. I'd have a women's empowerment event as an example, and I'd ask the VP of HR, the EVP of HR, hey, would you come out? And she wouldn't be able to, she couldn't make it, but she sent a VP out, and they saw that and reported back to what was going on. And when I got promoted to area director that had me in New Jersey, now I had more of them coming, and they saw those things that I was doing, which afforded me the opportunity in 2018 to move from area director of HR into a director of diversity and inclusion for Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, international global company. So already an advocate for quite some time. And I found that important because I found that my hotel thrived better. I found that my team thrived better. My engagement scores were better when I was doing those things. I usually came into hotels that had problems with employee engagement, and these tools that I just described, I would employ those things and I would see my engagement scores move up. And as a business, we did better because we are, instead of having an entirely homogenous team over time, if I had different perspectives at the senior level, we were just more creative, more innovative as a team, more collaborative as a team, and it was a better business. So that was my business case. Every new hotel I went into, or a bigger operation, that was my business case right there. You want to do better on all factors, we employ these things.
What's interesting is if you whether you read headlines or the latest story about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it may feel like it's run its course, and there's a lot of opposition to the idea of DEI and B. I'm curious from your perspective, as someone that's doing the work, like do you feel like that's the case? Do you feel like we need to do something differently? Do you feel like it's just continue to do the work that you've been doing for many, many years? I just find myself sometimes getting frustrated in the debate about it versus actually getting to the work. So I'm curious what your take is.
Right now, right? You hear them on the news talking about the Democratic potential nominee and using DEI as if it's the N-word or a bad word, and negativity. You fill in the blank, but they're saying, DEI hire. What's worse, I get is frustrated when I hear a reporter, the politician hadn't said it yet, but the reporter says, "Are you saying she's a DEI hire?" And I'm like, why is that? Why are we continuing to add that into our environment? That is not a thing. It is not a thing. DEI, just in B, right? That's 4 different practices. That's 4 different things you have to do. And they're making it like it's one. And so to me, and I'm a little bit different. I was an operations guy, and I look at it differently. And so I get a little bit frustrated also with folks in my community that want to change the name now because of that. Why are we running away from that? DEI has been since the 90s and before the 90s, it has always been a marathon. It's never been a sprint, and it is always a struggle. It is always a difficult conversation. It is always misunderstood, and that's going to continue to happen. That's really the way it is. So changing the name and I'm hearing people, putting I in front of the D. Well, we did that in 2018, 19, when I first joined, they were moving away and putting I in front of the D. We already went through that cycle. It doesn't matter what you do with it. It's the work that's done and how you explain the work that's done. So again, I talk to people who are resistant, knowing that they're going to be resistant. So at an executive committee meeting, senior leaders, I'm talking about, hey, I'm looking at our convention service managers as an example. Big hotel, you probably got 5 convention service managers. And I see that I'm looking at these 5 women and men, combination of women and men, and I see women who have more experience as a convention service manager than the guy, but yet the woman is making less. I think that's a bit of a problem, don't you? Don't you think there's something there? And what do we do about it? Well, it doesn't mean that we just take the woman and now make her pay her more than the guy. What I say is we implement a strategy where we are slowly, that person might get a little bit more than the other person. After all, they have more experience. Now, there's more behind it. Let's look at the performance reviews, and if that person is performing as the same or more or even better, that's even more of an argument. Why are we paying that person less? And it's the same thing then with other represented groups. And inevitably, every hotel I've ever gone into, that is what's happening. When you line it up, that's the way it is majority of the time. And you put a plan in place to do that, because when they're making more money and they're paid as they should be, they perform even better. And so wouldn't, as a business, we perform better? The last thing, I could go on and on, but the last thing I'll say about this is, again, from a business perspective, if you take a room full of this like-minded, same group of folks, very similar, same church, same college, same community, versus 7 different people, usually about, depending on the size of your hotel, you're going to have 5 to 10 executive committee members. If you got, we'll say 8, all pretty much the same, versus 8 that are very different, you're going to have more ideas to choose from. And you get the ability to pick the best idea out of those ideas. And you will likely do better because you had a better idea. You had good ideas to choose from. You're going to perform better. You're going to do that. So nobody ever said, I'm sure in your organization, when you were working at corporate America, did your company ever say, we're going to take the most mediocre person and promote them? Now, some mediocre people got hired, but it usually wasn't somebody that was underrepresented in the first place. Just keeping it real, right? But no company ever said, we're going to just pick the most mediocre person. What we said is we want the best person. So when I'm looking at, I said I was going to end it, but I'm almost done. If I have a new position that I'm about to fill, right, and I see that there's a different perspective that needs filling, I'm going to look for that perspective. Not necessarily a woman per se. We'll just say it's a woman. But I am going to say, okay, if I need a more analytical person and I'm short women, then I'm going to say, well, let's see if we can find a woman who's more analytical. That's what I'm going to do. Nobody ever said, well, get me the most mediocre analytical woman. Nobody says that. So that's that. So I hope I answered your question. No, I'm not. I'm leaning in. I'm not leaning away.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I'm going to switch to the brand of Victor for a second. And I'm curious, what would you say is your superpower?
I have a couple, I think. The 2 biggest ones for me are building relationships. Probably said that a couple times already. In my growth in my career is having the ability to build relationships. I can tell you, the research is out there that the biggest derailer for an exec is the inability to build relationships. And I think that's critical for leaders, is you got to have ability to build relationships. And I think I do that well. The other thing is problem solving. I could see a problem almost before I could see it getting ready to start. And I can head it off before it turns into a bigger problem, or I can come into a situation that is already a full-blown problem, and I can usually navigate our team through whatever that is to a good resolution.
On the side of building relationships, I know one of the things you value is mentorship and giving back. And I'm curious, why has it been important for you to take the time out of probably your busy schedule, a lot of things professionally, personally, but to really focus on helping others? Why is that important? I
did learn that early on, giving back to the community. And so that's always been a part of me. In my career, I was at a couple of different crossroads early on in my career where someone reached back and helped me out. Someone showed me the ropes in a few critical points throughout my career. And I feel like that that's the right thing to do. That's something that you should do, help others. And I feel like it helps launch me. I've been ultra successful in my career. I'm at, a pinnacle in my career, and I owe it to people helping me, and I never turned down. And somebody reached out with this call, I'm sure someone's gonna reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you." And I take all those calls. I take all those. Don't call me to sell me something. I don't take those. But if you want to see, I had one today. I had someone that reached out to me that said, "Hey, I wanted to talk to you. Could we have 20 minutes of coffee?" I take those all day, every day. I think it helps me. It helps me in my career because I think everything is sort of cyclical, and you get what you put. I think you get what you put out. And so I do that all the time. Love it. And I think it's helpful for your community. All boats rise when you do that.
I 100% agree. And I also feel that when you take that time to sit with someone, it actually forces you to answer the question of what do you think? And It forces you, like we're doing with this conversation, you kind of got to look back over your shoulder and say, how did I get here? And it refines your story even more when you're sharing it and you're trying to help someone else. And then the thing that I think that it takes a while for us to get there, but I always equate it to the Beyonce effect. Beyonce and I both have 24 hours in the day, yet her impact is so much larger because of how she influences people. So if I have a little bit of Beyonce in me and try to influence and impact others and their journey, then one day I can get to in that stratosphere is what how I think about some of those outreaches and sitting with people and providing your thoughts.
Yeah, so cool.
What have you learned from husbandhood and parenthood?
Well, from parenthood, I watched my dad, and my dad was, growing up, I got to tell you, my dad and I did not I hated my dad. My dad was always on me. He was just on me. And, but when I went to San Diego, and actually, what I didn't tell you earlier is that my girlfriend that went with me, she actually broke up and went home. And while I was there on my own trying to figure things out, a few things happened that were things that I heard my dad in the back of, he had ingrained into me. One simple one was just cleaning up my room. He used to say to me, "Boy, clean up your room. What if your friends come over here?" Well, when I was in San Diego, somebody just dropped by my apartment, and I was like, "Whew, thank goodness, my place was clean." And boom, I heard his voice. And I can't tell you how many things happened when I moved out of the house for the first time. All these things, like just automatic, like muscle memory from what I learned from him. And he became my hero at that point. Like, "Dad, you saved me. Thanks so much." And so one of the things that he did with kids was, even though he traveled a lot in his role, he was always there. He didn't miss any birthdays. If he was in China or Russia, Egypt, he couldn't be there. But when he was in town, he was there. He was at my games. He was there, and he was a strong pillar of advice. And that's what I do for my kids. I am there for them. I'm on the other side of the country now. They're on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. But my daughter's about to give birth. I'll be on a plane to be out there. I'm on baby watch duty right now. So I've been a pillar of advice for my kids. I've been super tough on them, but it's paid off. They're adults now, and I hear the same thing. Like, "Thank God, Dad. Thank you. You've been there for me. I really appreciate it." I hear that I had heard that from them. And then as a husband, what I learned was I was in a 28-year marriage that did not go well. And all the mistakes that I made in that, I've course corrected in this marriage. And that is, even though I still work a lot in this business, I make sure that I do the same thing. I missed the boat previously. I was I'm working and building my career. You just have to wait. Well, now the difference is I'm working and still, having this career that I have, but what can I do? So whenever I hear, hey, can you do this? Hey, can you, man, I'm just on it. And she's been such a great partner to me, and I mirror that. I'm just whatever you need, I'm there for you.
When you were talking about your dad, and then again how you're doing that with your kids, it reminded me of the older I get, the wiser my parents get. And it's like we all go through this process of realizing that maybe we don't know everything, and maybe our parents were right for telling us, and it's kind of a rite of passage as you become a parent, because then you go through it on the other side.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, have you had a mama we made it moment?
I grew up in this one, the second hotel that I went into and grew up there and worked in several positions and worked my way up at this hotel. And when I graduated from college, I got my first management position there. And when I got that position, I remember walking in. I had my suit from college, and I had my briefcase from college. And I walked and when I walked in, they opened the door to an office for me, and it used to be literally, it was a closet. But they had converted this into an office for me, and it had a sort of a broken down 6-foot table and a dilapidated chair and a telephone. And then I had an administrative assistant, and I was like, I got an office, I have a phone, a computer, an administrative assistant. This is it, baby. And I was beside myself, and then called to let them know I have an office, so that was a big moment for me. So yeah, my first management position, that was it.
I'm going to close out, and hopefully we can have a little bit of fun. When they turn this amazing story of yours into a movie, who would you want to play you on the big screen?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I have no idea. I would say, I'd say, first one that comes to my mind is Denzel. That was, as soon as you said that, Denzel came to my mind. But I'm not an action hero dude. But I think I really like him. So I'd say that'd be Denzel. He's pretty smooth. I'd say Denzel.
So what song would play in your trailer?
Well, I would go with at my wedding, man. The first wedding was at Circus and had a cassette recording. But this wedding, for the love of my life, this credible woman, we got married at my first hotel I grew up at. And when I was coming out to walk down the aisle, it was All I Do Is Win. I don't even know who the rappers are with that. There's like 3 or 4 of them. All I Do Is Win was my song. And that is, I grew up, I played on a championship football team. I don't know is not in my vocabulary. Like there's got to be a way to figure this out. And I've overcome so many things, and so all I do is win.
DJ Khaled, and a number of other people. But so I'm a huge fan of stories. My last name doesn't hurt, but I think there's so much you can learn by sitting with someone and hearing about their unique lived experience. And so for you, if there were 3 people, they could be with us, they could have passed on, but you could sit with them and hear their story firsthand. Who would be your 3?
I've thought about this often, and I've said, when I hit the lottery and I'm uber rich, then I would want to figure out a way to meet up with, like it or not, Will Smith. I just think his rise from what he was doing as a rapper to TV to movies, I'm enamored by that, and I'd love to hear how he did that. So I would do that. And the other person is J-Lo. Same thing, I used to watch her when she was, on In Living Color. And how do you go from a dancer to this, career that she's had, and now in business. And I just would love to have a lunch or a dinner and learn how she did that. And then I would want to know. I would want to have a conversation with Martin Luther King. I think that there are so many layers to him, and I'd want to do the same thing. Have dinner and the civil rights. Yeah, I get all that, but I'd want to know, like, how did you handle all that was coming at you and being locked up, and how'd you navigate through? How'd you make it through that? Was it just? I'm not a religious person. I'm a heathen, so But was it more than that? Was it religion that got you through that, or I'd want to know what is it that got you through that?
The other fascinating thing with him is just how young he was.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the impact he had in a relatively short amount of time, even, I think about myself being older than what he was when he was changing the world. It's just phenomenal to think about.
Yeah.
So speaking of great stories, who is someone that I should have on the podcast to share their story, because everyone needs to hear it, but with one caveat? It has to be someone that you can help me get on.
The easiest one is a good buddy of mine from school, Russell Edmond, who has a #1 radio show. We played ball together at junior college, and then we went up. Both had hospitality careers, and I think he would be an interesting person to talk to. Coming up from where he grew up and to where he is today. I think he would be a good one. That'll be an easy one for me to reach out to him right after this call. So that's one. Cool. Off air, I probably got a couple more I could send your way.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to share, or is there anything you want to ask me?
Anything that I left? Oh, one thing that didn't come up, that I always also like in a lot of my trajectory was my grandfather, Willie Fate Simmons, my dad's father. He was in the military also. He was in the Navy Reserve, in the kitchen. He worked in the executive lounge at Firestone Tires. He was the maitre d', and then he was a waiter at Hilton in the room service department. And then after 30 years of doing all three of those roles, he started off of a 4th grade education. He started a catering business. And that was another profound experience for me, was, just being a self-made person and just persevering over those things. Both of them coming out of Alabama, and the trajectory that they had was a big guiding force. So that was another impactful part of my experience.
No, that's awesome. And it makes a ton of sense for why you've been able to do what you've been able to do.
Okay.
But before I let you go, if people want to connect with you, they want to learn more about what you're up to, where should I send them?
Mainly, I'd say LinkedIn, which is where I am professionally. If you care to, you can catch up with me on Instagram, VicSim on Instagram. It's mostly personal stuff. So if you just, social, I'd say Instagram. Eventually, I do want to. I want to be like you, Mr. Matt Story, and have my own podcast and do that kind of stuff. I want to blow up my social media. So yeah, hit me up on both Instagram and LinkedIn.
Nice. Well, I'll include those links so we can get those numbers up. But I really appreciate you for sharing your story transparently and authentically. It really means a lot, and wish you continued success.
Matt, thank you so much. This was a real treat. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I really learned a lot listening to Victor's story, and I think there were a number of things that he said about his journey that really stood out to me. But the three that really I've just been sitting with and thinking about are, first, he talked about you don't really know what's going to happen, and you don't really know what you're going to encounter until you take the leap. And I think we can sometimes get in our head, we can sometimes have those assumptions that he referenced and not realize that we don't know. And I think sometimes just being able to take the leap is really what we're looking to do, and what, can put us in a position to be even more successful, put us in a position to be even more impactful, more connected, or whatever goal that you're chasing. The second thing that he talked about is, and this is really core to, his career and what he's been able to build, but he talked about DEI being a marathon, and it's always going to have its struggle. And it always has had its struggle, no matter what we could describe it as, whether it's DEI, it's IND, it's DEIB, like the names have changed, but the struggle has always been there. But I think what's really interesting is really focusing in on the work and focusing on the impact of the work is really where he's made a difference and he's made an impact. And I think we can sometimes get into the debates and we can sometimes get into the academics of it as opposed to really understanding that the work is really what's going to make the difference at the end of the day. And then lastly, he talked about, and he was saying this in reference to the execs he's seen, the execs he's come into experience with and how he's really approached his career. But the biggest obstacle to an executive being successful is really tied to their ability or inability in making relationships and being able to nurture and build those relationships over time. And I think we can sometimes see that as the soft skills, or we sometimes see that as that's the nice to have. But I think that really stood out to me because I know the leaders that I've really learned from and looked up to and respected have always been those that really focused in on investing in relationships, not just with me, but with others. And that doesn't just mean their peers. It doesn't just mean their teams. It means up the organization, outside the organization, and what have you. So that also was something that stood out to me. Until next time, I encourage you, as always, to continue to share your story. It's so important, not only for you, but for others to hear your story. And if you have any feedback or any comments about any of the podcasts, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at all of the social channels at Matt E. Story, or you can go to my website, www.mattestory.com.